Is Alberta finally separating? It's a question that would have seemed absurd a decade ago. Today, with 37% of Albertans supporting independence and that number projected to cross 50% if certain conditions are met, it deserves serious analysis beyond the dismissive takes you'll find in mainstream media. The numbers are in, and they're nothing short of alarming for anyone concerned about Canadian unity. Recent polling reveals that over 37% of Albertans now support independence, a figure that would have seemed unthinkable just a generation ago. This isn't just statistical noise or fleeting frustration, it's the culmination of decades of mounting grievances that have transformed Alberta from a cornerstone of confederation into a province actively contemplating its exit. What's particularly striking about this surge in separatist sentiment is how it cuts across demographic lines. While support remains strongest in rural areas, younger Albertans are increasingly drawn to the independence movement, unburdened by concerns about pensions that might give older generations pause. Should current political trajectories continue unchanged, experts project support could cross the 50% threshold by the next federal election, a tipping point that would fundamentally alter Canadian politics. But the grievances extend far beyond mere financial imbalances. Federal policies have repeatedly targeted Alberta's economic lifeblood, its resource sector. The cancellation of the Energy East pipeline stands as a monument to Eastern priorities overriding Western interests. Meanwhile, emissions caps and mounting restrictions on resource development have strangled economic growth in a province that depends on its natural resources. Premier Danielle Smith has vocalized this frustration, warning that federal Liberal policies have illegally encroached on Alberta's resource rights and stifled its oil and gas industry for years. A proposed "What's Next" panel following the federal election signals that provincial leadership is taking these sentiments seriously enough to formalize next steps. The structural disadvantage Alberta faces in Ottawa further inflames separatist passion. With relatively few seats compared to central Canada, Alberta's concerns are easily overruled by the interests of Ontario and Quebec voters. As one source bluntly stated, federal decisions are made with voters in Ontario and Quebec in mind because that's where the majority of the seats are. This systemic imbalance means policies suitable for central Canada are routinely imposed on Alberta, regardless of their relevance or benefit to the province. Alberta NDP leader Naheed Nenshi has dismissed Premier Smith's warning of a national unity crisis as childish and juvenile, suggesting she call a referendum on Alberta's separation if she's serious. Yet polling indicates such a referendum today would see 25% voting to leave, with another 19% undecided. Numbers that could shift dramatically depending on federal policies following the next election. Perhaps most telling is that 20% of Albertans would support becoming a US state or territory, a clear indication that, for many, the issue isn't about independence in the abstract, but rather escaping what they perceive as an exploitative relationship with Ottawa. Mark Carney, the embodiment of what Alberta opposes. That willingness to join another country rather than remain in confederation reveals something profound about Alberta's frustration, and no figure embodies what they're fighting against more perfectly than Mark Carney. Behind his impressive credentials as governor of two central banks lurks something far more concerning to Albertans, a powerful, unelected elite who represents everything that's pushed the province toward considering independence. Carney's resume reads like the perfect caricature of the establishment Alberta separatists are rebelling against. Former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, he's now positioning himself for potential Liberal leadership without ever having faced voters in an election. For a province that feels systematically ignored by Ottawa, Carney's trajectory from unelected banker to potential national leader without democratic accountability strikes at the heart of Alberta's grievances. The clash between Carney's worldview and Alberta's economic reality couldn't be more stark. While Alberta's prosperity depends on its resource-based economy, particularly oil and gas, Carney has built his political brand on climate initiatives that many Albertans view as direct threats to their livelihoods. His focus on carbon credits, emission caps and international climate cooperation, is interpreted not as environmental stewardship but as deliberate sabotage of the industry that forms Alberta's economic backbone. Premier Danielle Smith has been blunt in her assessment of Carney, expressing frustration with his unwillingness to end proposed caps on oil and gas emissions. Her skepticism reflects widespread concern that Carney doesn't just misunderstand Alberta's needs, he actively works against them. Her warning that there is a real danger that the new Prime Minister is worse than the old Prime Minister speaks volumes about how the province's leadership views Carney's potential rise to power. Perhaps most telling is Preston Manning's stark warning that a Carney-led government could be the final trigger for Western secession. Manning, founder of the Reform Party and a respected voice in Western Canadian politics, doesn't make such predictions lightly. His assessment carries significant weight, suggesting that Carney's leadership would represent such a fundamental threat to Alberta's interests that it could accelerate the breakdown of national unity. The democratic deficit Carney represents is particularly galling for Albertans. That someone who has never faced voters could wield such enormous influence over policies directly affecting their province's future feels like a slap in the face to many. It reinforces the perception that decisions about Alberta's resources are made by distant elites, with little accountability to the people most affected by those decisions. Polling data confirms the threat Carney poses to national unity. If the Liberals win the next federal election, support for Alberta's independence could jump from 10% to 15%, a direct response to the policies and leadership of figures like Carney, who are seen as representing Eastern interests over those of Alberta. The practical pathway to Alberta independence. Those polling numbers might seem modest, but they're just the beginning of what could become a constitutional earthquake. While many dismiss Alberta separation as an empty threat, the province actually has a clear legal pathway to independence that leverages its control of resources Canada desperately needs. What most Canadians don't realize is that Alberta possesses three specific advantages that make independence not just possible, but potentially inevitable under the right conditions. The Canadian Constitution doesn't explicitly outline how a province can separate, but the Supreme Court has already established the framework. In their landmark reference re-secession of Quebec case, the court ruled that a clear vote favouring separation obligates the federal government to negotiate in good faith. This creates a surprisingly straightforward first step. Alberta simply needs a clear referendum result to force Ottawa to the negotiating table. But here's where Alberta's position becomes truly powerful. Unlike Quebec's previous separation attempts, Alberta holds an economic trump card, control over vast oil and gas reserves that are vital to Canada's economy. These resources represent a substantial portion of the country's GDP and exports, giving Alberta extraordinary leverage in any separation negotiations. Ottawa knows that access to these resources would be at stake, creating a powerful incentive to offer favourable terms rather than risk losing them entirely. Alberta's strong provincial identity and economic self-sufficiency form another cornerstone for potential independence. The province has developed a distinct culture and has consistently asserted its interests within the federation. More importantly, its resource-based economy provides the financial independence necessary to support a transition to statehood without relying on federal transfers, a crucial advantage other separatist movements typically lack. Premier Danielle Smith's Sovereignty Act represents more than just provincial posturing. It's the legal infrastructure that could facilitate separation. The act allows Alberta's legislature to simply disregard federal laws deemed harmful to provincial interests. While its constitutionality remains debated, the act was specifically designed to create a political crisis, according to some analysts. It establishes a precedent for Alberta to assert greater control over its affairs and could serve as a launching pad for more assertive separation negotiations. Of course, practical challenges would need addressing, establishing a currency, negotiating borders, and developing trade relationships. The division of national assets and debts would require careful negotiation to ensure fair outcomes, but Alberta's economic strength provides solutions to many of these challenges. including the possibility of adopting the US dollar or creating its own currency backed by resource wealth. The Quebec precedent offers another advantage. The Supreme Court's ruling established that the rest of Canada cannot simply refuse to negotiate following a clear separation vote. This legal precedent forces Ottawa to engage with Alberta's demands rather than dismiss them, creating a constitutional pathway that simply didn't exist before Quebec's attempts. The political landscape is changing rapidly, and it's not just talk anymore. According to analyst Jeff Russ, if the Liberals secure another term, we could see well-funded activists accelerate Alberta's push towards sovereignty. The disgust with Trudeau's government, particularly regarding petroleum policies, has created fertile ground for separation sentiment to flourish. What's genuinely concerning for the rest of Canada is the domino effect. If Alberta votes to exit, it would immediately empower other secessionist movements across the country. The entire Canadian Federation could unravel more quickly than most realize. The next federal election won't just decide who leads Canada. It might determine if Canada remains whole at all. Thanks for watching. Do you think Alberta could actually separate from Canada? Is this just political posturing, or are we witnessing the beginning of something historic? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update on Canada's political transformation. This story is far from over, and the next election could change everything. I'll see you in the next one.